video designed to talk about teaching. In the video, we're not going to look at teaching language per se, but rather stop and take a moment to consider what it is we do when we teach more generally. Teaching is an act that seems deceptively easy. Everyone has had some experience in school and with a teacher. Teachers just explain, and then the teacher does something, and then the teacher gives a grade, right? Well, not exactly. You see, here's the problem. Many people can stand in front of a group and talk, but is this really teaching? Teaching is actually much more complex than just giving someone an explanation. It requires understanding how people learn and setting appropriate and clear goals for that learning. It's about breaking skills down into manageable bite-sized pieces for students. It's about giving concrete and specific feedback that provides students with not just what they're doing correctly or incorrectly, but how the skills are developing and what to do to perform the skill even better. It's about organizing a classroom context, the time, the space, and the materials to maximize opportunities for students to learn. It's about helping students use what they already know and building on it to learn new things. And it's about providing support to bridge this understanding. It's about asking questions that get student thinking. It's about constantly checking in to gauge how students are doing and what they're learning. And it's about using this information to adjust the lesson or strategy, often on the spot, to better help your students. Good teaching requires careful planning, coupled to the ability to think and react spontaneously to the ever-changing needs of your students and classroom. You can't go in unprepared, and even with careful preparation, things can go sideways. Teaching is a complex act that requires many years of experience and careful reflection to master. The good news is that you already have some experience teaching and learning. Now let's dig into understanding that experience a little better so we can see how teaching and learning happens and use that understanding to design our lessons more consciously. To keep things simple, I've broken down the act of teaching into 3 phases: activate, build, and check. You need all these phases in an effective lesson, but they don't always appear in this order. In fact, they often occur concurrently or in different orders, but let's keep it simple for now by looking at them one by one. So here are the teaching steps in any plan or lesson or activity. In the A phase, we want to draw students' attention to what it is we're learning. This is sometimes called the hook. It helps to establish not just what the goal of the lesson is, but also why it's important to learn it. If you don't do this phase thoroughly, you'll inevitably hear things like pourquoi on fait ça, which is French for why are we doing this anyway? And if you don't hear it said out loud, trust me, it's going on inside their brains. Everyone needs to know why we are learning something in order for the learning to be important and meaningful and to stick. In this phase, you'll also activate the students' prior knowledge about what you're going to learn. Activating what the students already know helps them to feel more confident, less lost at sea, and gives them a basis to build on, which sets the stage for learning to happen. The B is for build. This is the phase most people think of when they picture teaching. It includes focused instruction, which is where the teacher explains something, but it also includes the teacher modeling what to do, scaffolding understanding, and giving students opportunities to practice the new skill until it becomes automatic. Finally, in C, we check for understanding. Although our A, B, C mnemonic in C comes last, good teachers are constantly checking in at every phase. Planning a moment where you more formally check or evaluate the skill, however, can be helpful as it gives you opportunity to provide feedback to the students about how they're doing and how to improve. To illustrate the ABCs, I'm going to use an example that has nothing to do with language teaching: learning how to swim. At this point, if you were in a face-to-face classroom right now, I'd ask you to do a quick think, pair, share. That is, think about what steps you'd take to teach someone a swimming technique, pair up with a partner, and compare your ideas together, And finally, share with everyone. Think, pair, share is a great way to activate what you know already. Since this is a video, however, and you're probably on your own, at this point I'm going to ask you to think by yourself for a minute. Feel free to pause the video and write down a few notes. When you're ready to move on, compare your ideas to my example. Ready? Okay. What is the first thing you'd do if you were teaching someone how to swim? Confession time. I might have misled you a bit. That's because learning to swim, like learning a language, cannot be done in one lesson. It needs to be broken down skill by skill. So for my example, I'm going to take the skill of breathing while swimming. I chose this one because I used to be a swimming instructor, and it struck me that although we teach young children to blow bubbles in the water in their first lessons, that this skill doesn't really stick for most people. In fact, most of the swimmers of all ages and levels that I worked with instinctively held their breath while swimming. So the goal for my lesson today is to get my students to breathe regularly while swimming. Here we go. The first phase is activate. I'm going to activate my students' prior knowledge. That is, get them to show me what do they know already. To do this, I'd say something like, okay, let's jump in the water, have fun, swim to the other side. Nice. Now, how many of you did this? At this point, I'd hold my breath. When you were in the water. How many of you did this? At this point, I'd breathe out, blowing bubbles. When you were in the water. How many of you aren't really sure what you do and don't do? No problem. Let's take a moment to think about our breath together. This is where I do a bit of scaffolding by asking questions like why do you hold your breath? I would demonstrate again, leading towards getting the students to say something like, yeah, it's our instinct to hold our breath when we are underwater. I'd also explain that this is okay and actually a good idea if you want to float in one place, but if you want to move in the water, it's not such a great idea. I'd ask the students then to have a look at what I'm doing while I demonstrated how to breathe correctly while swimming. I'd ask them, what do you notice? Hopefully leading them towards noticing that I'm blowing out all my air underwater and only breathing in when my head comes back to the surface. I'd ask them, why should you blow out all your air underwater? Any ideas? Now this is the fun part. In order to show my students why we shouldn't hold our breath while swimming, I'd give them a parallel example. At this point, I would stand at the side of the pool and run in place while holding my breath and gasping every 20 seconds or so. I don't mind looking silly, and the students, when they see me, get the point right away. If I think it's appropriate, I'll get them to do the same thing. Run in place and breathe in and out for only 1 second of every 20. At this point, they should realize that if you're going to hold your breath while doing any kind of physical activity, you're going to run out of energy very quickly. Once they're out of breath and gasping, I'd ask them if they hold their breath while running. Why not? What happens if you hold your breath while swimming? So you get the point, and usually the students do too. To recap, this is the A, activate, draw their attention part of the lesson. Together as a group, we've established what we're paying attention to and why we're paying attention to it using the students' prior knowledge and understanding. Now it's time to move on to the next phase, the B, or build phase. The B in build is the richest part of the lesson. Acknowledgements here go to Fisher and Frey and their construct called the gradual release method. As you can see from their graphic, there are 4 parts to the gradual release method. I encourage you to think of this as the I do, we do, you do phase. In the first part, the I do, the teacher does focused instruction, often modeling what to do. This is where principles are explained, rules are demonstrated, and the teacher can ask questions to encourage inductive reasoning. In the second part, the we do, the teacher does examples together with the class, scaffolding all along by asking questions and giving examples. In the third part, the you do phase, students practice. They work collaboratively at first, in small groups and pairs, and then more independently to practice the skill. Note that it's not always possible to do collaborative practice, but giving students a chance to share and compare ideas wherever possible will strengthen their learning, confidence, and understanding. Students can practice skills doing classic drill-type exercises. In fact, drills can be really effective when they're done consciously and with purpose. But practice can also be things like games, competitions, and puzzles. You can even use music, rhythm, melody, or art, like drawing diagrams and plots. The more ways you find to engage students while they practice, the more interested they'll be and the more effective the learning becomes. So let's go back and zoom in on the focused instruction part of the lesson. That's the top part of the triangle in the gradual release method. Let's look at how a teacher can explain a rule, principle, or idea during the focused instruction, or the I do part of the lesson. There are a few ways to do this, including direct explanations. In fact, using visuals and examples on the board always helps. Demonstrations. This is the I do. This includes the teacher giving an example and modeling what to do, as well as using what's called a think aloud protocol. That is, the teacher explains what they are thinking as they're doing a skill, and it helps the students to see and hear what's going on inside an expert's mind as they do the skill. Finally, the teacher can ask the students a series of questions, guiding them towards targeted principles through scaffolding. So going back to my swimming lesson, here's an example of how I might do a focused instruction for how to breathe while swimming. First, I might do a quick demonstration to show the students what to do, as in an I do, and then scaffold their attention and understanding through a series of questions. For example, what happens if we hold our breath while swimming? How long do I take when I'm breathing out? How long do I take when I'm breathing in? Where is my head? Etc., etc. My intention would be to lead them to the direct explanation of the principle or rules to follow while practicing the skills. This will prepare them to start practicing the skills themselves in the next phase, the we do or shared instruction part of the lesson. Here we are at the we do phase. In the shared instruction or we do part of the lesson, I'd get the whole class to practice blowing bubbles together. Perhaps I'd do it first and then pick a few students at random to demonstrate. The dialogue would go something like this. Okay, student 1, now you. Nice bubbles, but I still hear some breath above the water. Keep your head under for a count of 3. Everybody, let's count together. 1, 2, 3. Nice, you stayed under longer that time and I saw the bubbles. That means you were breathing out correctly. Okay, student number 2, your turn next, etc. Next, I might pair the students and ask them to count out loud underwater while they breathed out. Their partner would have to listen and see if they could hear their numbers the friend was saying underwater. I could get them to count to 3, then to 5, then to 10, maybe guess the numbers or the word that their friend was saying, and so on. In the independent you do phase, collaborative learning of this kind is also known as the guided practice or you do part of the lesson. This is where you can ask your students to work in pairs or small teams, testing and checking each other. Again, students can play games, test each other with cue cards, solve puzzles, and generally support each other until they're ready for the next phase, which is you do. In the independent you do phase, students do exercises, drill, and practice independently without help or guidance from the teacher or their peers. The final phase of the lesson is the C, checking for understanding. Why do we do this? Well, this is the point where we give students feedback to correct their skills. And it's also the part of the lesson where we decide if the students have got it and can move on to the next skill, or if we need to circle back and review and re-explain. When do we check? Again, good teachers check in constantly through the lesson so that we know if we need to adjust our explanations and our instructions or the questions we're asking. But it should also happen in a more robust way when the students are finished with the You Do independent practice part of the lesson. How do we check for understanding? Well, if you're checking in with the class during any of the other phases of the lesson, you might want to use one of the following group check techniques. Here are some great ways you can check the whole class briefly and in a low-risk way. The first one is thumbs up. I often do this in class where I ask the students to put a thumbs up if they think the answer is yes or no. The second is 5 fingers. The students can hold up 1 to 5 fingers reflecting multiple choice responses, A, B, C, D, or E. I also ask them to rate their confidence using this technique with the 5 fingers. 5 meaning, yep, I'm absolutely confident, I'm ready to practice on my own, or 1 being, no, I need some more explanations. True-false cards are great. You can ask the students a series of questions and they can answer using holding up true or false cards. One of my new favorites is the mini whiteboard, where students in pairs or small groups are asked a question, debate the answer, and write it on the board. And then at a signal, they hold up the board for everybody in the class to see all at once. This is a great way to check to see if everyone has understood and if there's a lot of similarities or discrepancies in the answer. Finally, there's lots of technology out there, such as whiteboard clickers or online quiz games like Kahoot, that you can use to check everyone as a class in a fun way. One of my new favorite techniques that I often use in university classrooms to see if my explanation was clear is to use thumbs up, thumbs down. I'll ask the students after an explanation, did you get it? And to show me by giving thumbs up or thumbs down if they still have questions. Just a quick note about these group check techniques. So many teachers, myself included, make the mistake of asking, when we ask the whole class a question, of getting answers from only 1 or 2 students. The problem is when only 1 or 2 students give a correct answer, it doesn't actually tell me what each person is able to do or if everyone understood. In fact, if only 2 students answer out of 30, I have no idea if the other 28 understood. I need to use a real test, which happens when they do it by themselves. This is why at the end of the lesson, it's a good idea to plan a moment where you can assess individual student skills, whether that's formally through a test or an assignment or another evaluation, or informally through a quick question and answer session or an exit card. If you're responsible for evaluating, that is, giving a grade, the C phase is also when more summative evaluation happens. When students are learning to breathe underwater, for example, I'd ask them to swim a certain distance, and then I'd watch their breathing very carefully. After I'd observed them, I'd give each student feedback about their efforts to reach the goal, and if needed, what they can do to improve even more. If you're in a classroom, you could ask students to do an activity or test independently while you evaluate their skills. So we've reached the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Keep in mind the ABCs and the I do, we do, and you do, and you'll have the basis for an excellent lesson. In the next videos, I'll use the ABCs and I do, we do, you do as frames for a lesson in how to teach specific language skills.